If the sight of something like this makes your skin crawl, you might have arachnophobia, or this, trypanophobia. But according to Chapman University's annual survey of nearly 2,000 people, neither of those even made the top 10 biggest fears Americans have in 2018. According to the survey, environmental issues account for a whopping 5 of the top 10 spots, with pollution of our air, water, global warming, and extinction of plants and animals all being major fears for Americans, which is huge considering not a single environmental concern made the list in 2016. Fears about money and not having enough of it, and high medical bills were also among the top 10, and death and illness came in side by side at 5 and 6 respectively. But the fear that 73.6% of those surveyed said was their biggest fear was government corruption. And while it's been the number one for the last 4 years, it's up 13% since 2016. In a blog post, the researchers noted, since Trump's election, Americans are increasingly fearful of pollution, global warming, and other environmental disasters, going on to say that fear in general is on the rise. According to them, 2 years ago, only 2 of the top 10 fears were held by more than 40% of respondents. But in 2018, more than half of all Americans have all 10.
But what James is going to present to us over these weeks, it's not those things. It's not some of these outside things. It is internal attitudes and internal character and internal responses that James is going to bring up that we should be concerned about in our church body. And so when we talk about the things that should scare the church, today we're going to talk about unhinged passion. Today we're going to talk about unhinged passion. And as you join me in James chapter 4, we're going to read through the first 5 verses, and then I'll unpack that a little bit with us this morning. What is the source of wars and fights among you? Don't they come from your passions that wage war within you? You desire and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and wage war. You don't have because you don't ask. You ask and don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? So whoever wants to be the friend of this world becomes the enemy of God. Or do you think it's without reason that the Scriptures say the Spirit He made to dwell in us envies intensely? In my study for this morning, I came across a quote that I want to share with you. Listen to this. Is it not because of this passion that relations are broken, that this natural goodwill changed into desperate enmity, that great and populous countries are desolated by domestic dissensions, land and sea filled with ever new disasters by naval battles and land campaigns? For the wars famous in tragedy have all flowed from one source: desire, either for money or glory or pleasure. And over these things the human race goes mad. That leads us to our truth today. The main truth that I want us to walk away with this morning, and that's this: unhinged passion leads to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people. Unhinged passion leads to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people. And that is a critical truth for us to understand. Because when passion goes awry, when passion overwhelms us, when passion gets out of control, then this is what happens in church life. This is what James is talking about. You've got wars among you at home, at church, at work, at school, in your friendship circle, wherever it may be. What is the source of all that? It is unhinged passion. And it's desperately important for us to understand this inside the church. Because too often we take everything dumps into the church, and we don't filter it, and too often we don't make sure we understand it, and sometimes we respond poorly to it. And what happens is this: we have unhinged passion. It's going out of control. We got our feelings hurt, and now it's spreading through like wildfire. We disagree with something, and now it's spreading like wildfire. We got upset about something, and it wasn't addressed properly, and so now, and all this stuff can happen. Guys, I've grown up in church like a whole lot of you. I've seen this time and time and time again. You have too. But the problem is that when passion is left unhinged, what goes on is that we have unbiblical pursuits. We start pursuing other people rather than pursuing the person of Christ. Because we start pursuing all of that. And we have unholy people. Why? Because we stop acting like Christ and we start acting like everything else. And when that happens, it's a good indicator that we have an unhinged passion going on. Maybe with one or many or the whole. But we have to be careful because James tells us some major things and some major negativities going on when passion is left unhinged. Look what he says in verse 1. The source of war and fights among you. The source of wars. Why? It's unhinged passion. It is this desire and you don't have it, you want it, you can't get it, all these other things. And so we have class wars, we have employment wars, we have church fights. It's the source of all wars among you. James isn't saying just in church, but he's saying the reason you've got wars in your neighborhood is because of all these class distinctions. And we set up all this stuff and we say, well, I'm better than you. And we have this unhinged passion that's setting out. We have a problem. And the source of the wars that you have, whatever war it is, you can look back across history and you can be a prophet into tomorrow. Whatever war it is, it comes back to an unmet desire, which usually is coupled with an unmet expectation, and now you're mad, and now you go on the attack. You go on the offense. And that is an unhinged passion that we need to check with our spirit, and we need to check with God. We need to check that and make sure that we're not allowing that to just free flow. We just can't let it be this free flow, unhinged kind of situation. But it says, it's the source of wars among you. Don't they come from your passions that wage war within you? So look at those two qualifiers. What's the source of wars among you? It is this unhinged passion, this desire that you don't have fulfilled. But look what he says next. But it's also comes from the passions that wage war inside of you. There are passions at war within you. As long as we are in this earth suit, we're going to battle this sense of what we need to do for Christ and what every part of our being also wants to do, the flesh, what Paul will call the flesh. When we want to distinct between the flesh and the spirit, they're at war with one another. Why? Because you've got this sense of passion, and these passions are waging this war inside of you. And when these passions start to come out of you, then you start to have these wars among you, and these fights among you that begin to happen. James is saying, look, this is a problem. This is a problem. You cannot continue to do that, and you need to be checking yourself in the situation with that. Why? Because unhinged passion leads to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people. Look what he continues to say in verse 2. You desire and you do not have. You want it, but you can't get it. You want it, but you don't have it. And we have this unhinged passion begin to... Have you ever just wanted something and somebody told you, no, you can't have it? You know that internal feeling that starts to rise up within you, right? You can't tell me no. How dare you tell me I can't have that? Well, I'll show you. I'll find a way to get it. And so that's this unhinged passion. It's rising up within you. You want something, you desire something, but you don't have it. And so now you begin to wage this war within you. Sometimes that spills out, and what begins to happen is, well, I'm going to go get it. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to go get that, whatever it may be. As a family, we watched Incredibles 2 last night. And if you've seen the movie, you know what happens to Jack when he doesn't get his cookie. That's you and me. When we want something, but we don't have it, we become this fireball on the inside. And if we don't watch it, we can destroy things around us too because of the unhinged passion that is outside of us. You want something, you don't have it, you murder and covet and cannot get it. You fight and wage war. So you want something, but you don't have it, and so you kill to get it. You want something, you can't get to it, so you pick fights and you pick arguments. And it's the same thing. You want something, and you know there's no way to get it, but now you're ticked off. Now you're in a bad mood. Now everything around you is going to be the recipient of your bad mood because you want something, you can't get it. You've tried to get it, you can't get it, and now everybody else is going to have to pay for it. This happens to us. This goes on. And the thing that becomes the problem is you may be able to handle that, but you've got this detritus all the way around you of death because you have gone through and you have just blown up everything around you. And now you've got all these hurt feelings. You've got all these mad people. You've got all this misunderstanding. You've got all these issues. And then that starts to churn up within them. The same thing. Well, I don't like that. I don't want this. And so it begins to breed on itself and it begins to multiply in this sense. And it says, you don't have because you don't ask. And even when you do ask, you don't receive because you ask with wrong motives. And what's that motive? So that you may spend it on your own pleasures. What did Christ ever do for his own pleasure? Everything he did was for you. Everything that he ever talked about was for us. Whatever he did in life, in death, in burial, in resurrection, all of it. It was for us. It wasn't for himself. I mean, maybe in another perspective you could say it's because he loved us and he wanted us to be with him. But that's so far down the list, it's inconceivable that we should even consider it. Everything he did was because he thought of you. He did it because he cared for you. He did it because he loved you. And so when his half-brother is now saying, look, when you ask and you don't get, calm down. Take a breath. You may not be getting it because you're asking with a wrong motivation. Because while you can ask, you can trick your mama and you can trick your grandmama and you can trick other folks at work and school, you can't trick God. And you can ask and you can be all super sweet and you can be all that and you may get so many things in life because of that. But I'm telling you, when you come before a holy God and you say, oh, and you I want that and oh, look at what I can do with all of this. God knows if you're being real or if you're being fake. God knows the motivation of your heart. Why are you really asking this? See, you and I have to ask ourselves that question. We have to step back and we have to say, why am I really wanting this to happen? Because God knows the motivation of why you're asking that. And if you don't have it, you need to double check yourself. You need to step back and go, why don't I have that? You all have been so gracious and so kind over these last several months in your generosity, in your prayers, in your concern, in your asking about our home. No, it hadn't sold yet. And I read verses 2 and 3 and I'm like, yeah, it might be kind of selfish. Because I don't want to have 2 mortgages any longer. So God, what is my motivation? What is it that you want? God, am I wrong in my ask? Am I wrong in what's going on? God, I don't understand because I don't think it's about me. I really think it's about these 3 down on the pew. But is it about me? I don't know. So God, I don't know. And if that's why that it hadn't, whatever. But I'm going to keep asking. Change my heart if that's what you got to do, God, but man, I'm asking and I'm not getting, and I got to know why. You ever felt like that? You ask and it doesn't happen and you don't know why? For whatever reason, God has told you no, and that kind of doesn't sit well with you sometimes. You're like, yeah, but. Or, this is free. I would rather God say no outright than wait. Can I get a witness on that? I would rather him just flat out say no. One of my children, left unnamed, came to me a while back and was asking something. I said, well, maybe. And they're like, yeah, maybe just means no, wrapped nice. And I'm like, no, maybe is just maybe. Maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't. Now, in all fairness, a lot of times, maybe is a gift-wrapped no. Come on, parents. All the youth said, preach. Yeah, here we go. But we've got to be careful that the passion over what we want doesn't become unhinged because we desire something. See, this is how it all starts. You want to know, how do we get there? It's like, no, I'm not waging wars. I don't have all of that. But let me show you how it starts. There's 4 steps to how this stuff happens. The first step is that we desire something. We want something. Now, there's nothing wrong in wanting something. I mean, unless it's unholy, illegal, and unethical. And then we got a whole other sermon process we'll walk through. But in general, we want something. Well, we always want something. We're always for want. I mean, yeah, I want this, and I want that, and I want this. And it's, if we're not careful, we can run into problems. But so it starts with a desire. Now, if we leave that unchecked, if we leave that just kind of open, and we let it fester a little bit, well, then what can happen is the next step is that we become dominated by it. We become dominated by it. So if that desire is left unchecked, then it's going to soon start to overcome us. And it's going to soon overwhelm us. And then it's going to be, that's the only thing you can think about. You get up in the morning thinking about it. You talk about it all day. You go to bed thinking about it. You become dominated by it. And you may not have voiced it, but inside your mind, you are being dominated by it. It's the only thing you can focus on. You can't see straight until what you want comes into your possession. You have become dominated by whatever that thing is. And I could have a list of items, but you've already got yours in your mind because you might be dominated by something. And then we begin to develop plans in our minds. How am I going to get it? And so we begin to develop these plans. What started out as a simple desire, hey, I'd like to have that. If you leave that unchecked, if you don't lay that at the feet of Jesus and say, when your time is right, it'll be fine, you run the distinct risk of being dominated by that over the course of some time. And that domination of it leads to you starting to develop plans. Do you see how unhinged passion can lead to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people? Because now we're starting to make plans. How am I going to get that? That's all I can think about. How am I going to get that? And we start making plans, and we start running scenarios. Well, if I do this, this is how we can do it. Well, if I do this, this is how I can get it. Well, if I do this, well, let's see. Which one is going to get that thing to me fastest? Which way can which one do I need to choose so that I can fly under the radar long enough and not get caught in the middle? Look, we've all done this. We've let desire become our domination, and our domination begins to develop these plans. And then sadly, if we don't get it checked out, if we don't leave it with Jesus, then a decision is made, and we decide to act. That domination is the only thing you can think about. Now you've developed plans. And in the development of the plans, it was just theory for a while. Well, maybe. Well, what if? Oh, yeah. And you thought you were satisfying the desire by just playing around with it. Stop that. Stop that. It's dangerous. Because a fire will burn. It will damage. Can a fire be wonderful and healthy and good? Yes. But a wildfire, not so much. It's going to damage and it's going to destroy anything in its path. And when we come to level 4 and we decide to act, then we see that unhinged passion that has led to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people. See, he calls us adulterous people. Adulterous people. Don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? See, those who have committed to God are now looking to something else to fill their desires. Those that have said, God, I give you my heart. God, I give you my life. God, I believe in Jesus Christ. I want to give you my life. You're the boss of me. Whatever you say goes. That's great and that's wonderful. And those are the statements that you, from the heart, must come to in order to have a relationship with God. The problem is we still face desires. We still have desires in our heart. And I'm not trying to hide anything. It's not, oh, well, hey, preacher's talking about sex, isn't he? Preacher's talking about any desire you have in your heart. You can have a desire for money, and it leads to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people. You can have a desire to have the best house on the block, and it can lead to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people. You can want to win Yard of the Month, and you could lead to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people. And you could want that girl down the street in such a way that leads to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people. It's across the board, guys. It's across the board. It's everything. And that is what should scare us the most, is that internal language that you hear, that voice you hear in your head, that stuff that keeps talking and keeps nagging. Don't you want that? Don't you want that? Hey, you haven't forgot about that yet, have you? Oh, wait, don't put that down. Don't put that aside. Don't leave that with Jesus, and that's nothing but the hellfire talking to you. That's nothing but Satan coming to you in the middle of your moment, in the middle of your life, in the middle of your night, saying, hey, come on. You know you want that. Why are you giving up on your dreams? I gave up on my dreams a long time ago so I could have God's dreams over me. How about you? Have you given up your dreams yet? Have you given up your desires yet? Have you stopped thinking about yourself and start thinking more about what does Jesus want for me? This is where James is going. We must choose, don't you know, that friendship with the world is hostility toward God. And He is a jealous God, my friends. Unhinged passion should frighten the church. I'll go a step further. Unhinged passion should frighten you, the Christian, because it leads to all kinds of situations. Two things that I want to share with you, and I'm going to give you your so what for the day. Unhinged passion. Look what it does. It will believe what the community, not Jesus, will tell them. If you have unhinged passion, you've stopped listening to Jesus, and you've started listening to everything in the community around you. Well, you've got to have this, you've got to have this, you've got to do this, you need to rise up to this, or you've got to, whatever it may be. The community at large will validate your desires that God would want you to set aside. And unhinged passion is a problem because it believes what the community will tell them more than what Jesus will tell them. Secondly, unhinged passion would behave how the community shows them rather than what Jesus has shown us. So when you start hearing that, well, it's your right to have this. Don't let anyone stand in your way. Don't let anything stand in your way. Hey, they did it to you, so you should be able to do it. Hey, do whatever it takes. Get yours in this life. These are mantras of the communal education of our world today that Christ stands in opposition to, and he stands there and asks you, you need to choose today. Who are you going to serve? Are you going to serve the community, or are you going to serve Christ? Which is it going to be? Because that's what's on the line here. That's what's on this moment, is this decision. Are we going to serve Christ, or are we going to serve the community that's feeding us the lies that will not satisfy the soul in the way that Christ alone can satisfy our soul? And when we see our community modeling for us, and I'm not saying community as local, I'm talking about our culture, the community, wherever you live, work, breathe, play. That's your community. And when it has modeled for us to lie and cheat and steal and bully and abuse and get your way at whatever cost, that is not the way of Christ. It is not the journey that we have been called to in Christ. We are to believe him and behave in his way, not the way everybody else around us may be suggesting. Why? Because unhinged passion leads to unbiblical pursuits and unholy people. So what are you going to do? James implies in these verses that to counter unhinged passion, there's three things you got to do. This is your do something this week. First, calm down. Calm down. If I've got food in a pan that is starting to reduce the liquid to such a point it's going to burn the food, what do you got? I got to turn that heat down. I've got to remove it from the heat. And sometimes we've got to remove ourselves from a situation because it's too hot for us to handle. Sometimes we've got to remove ourselves and take ourselves out of this and go to some place. Maybe you've got to drop to your knees. Maybe you've got to come to the church and pray at the altar. Maybe you've got to open up the Word of God and start pouring the Word of God into your mind because it's reeking with everything else that's in there right now. Whatever you got to do, you got to remove that. You got to calm down. Unhinged passion, not what you want. Passion, controlled, is not bad, but unhinged passion, oh my gosh, we've got to be careful. We've got to calm down. We've got to consider the ways of Jesus. Consider the ways of Jesus. And I know that in the middle of that domination, in the middle of that moment of developing all those plans, we're all the same. We get on a roll, man. We've got this desire. We've let it dominate us. And man, now it's just rolling. Now we're just free thinking. And it feels awesome. And the energy's great. And you're thinking, man, we're going to do this and that and the other. You need to stop and ask yourself a very important question. Write it on your mirror. Stamp it on a card and keep it in front of you. I don't care what you got to do. But you got to ask yourself, what would Jesus be wanting of me in this moment? You got to consider Jesus. What does Jesus, why? Because he bought you. He owns you. Follower of Christ, he owns you. And that's not a concept we all like in today's culture. But he's the boss. What boss is going to let somebody just go off half-cocked over here and not draw them back and say, hey, wait a minute, you can't do it this way. So self-police and come before God and say, I've got all these thoughts and I've got all these feelings, and God, I'm mad all the time and I'm grumpy and I'm frustrated and I don't get it. Help me understand what Jesus would do. And finally, and this is your do something right now possibly, choose to lay it down. Choose to leave it before God. Choose to set it aside And in a moment, we're going to sing a song, and you're going to have an opportunity, and maybe you want to come to the altar and spiritually lay something down. Maybe you want to physically lay something down. Maybe you want to write it down and write and whatever, and leave it here symbolically for you to say, I don't want this anymore. This isn't going to dominate me anymore. I want to leave it here at the altar, and whatever you may need to do, spiritually, physically, symbolically, I don't care. But we, as followers of Christ today, are being beckoned by the gospel of Jesus to lay it down and to leave it behind. For the sake of the gospel, for the glory of God, and for the lostness we must impact in our world today.